Ukraine's final stronghold is hit and Russia pays a $2.5 billion price. September 28, 2025. The peaceful skies over Odessa suddenly turn deadly. 5 Russian-caliber NK cruise missiles launched from the Admiral Grigorevich frigate 180 kilometers off the coast tore through the night sky. Their mission to destroy Ukraine's western naval base, the last stronghold of the country's navy after the fall of Sevastopol. As caliber missiles rained down on Odessa, Ukraine's air defenses roared alive. Interceptors carving silver arcs through smoke and flame. The city shuddered but endured. Crews at the western naval base stood unbroken. Then came a new command forged in determination, not rage. Operation Iron Swarm was launched. From secret sites, 540 drones rose. No stealth giants, just cheap machines guided by precision. Their mission? Pierce Russia's heart. Their target? Severnaya Shipyard in St. Petersburg. Pride of its submarine fleet. Can cheap $2,000 drones really penetrate Russia's multi-billion-dollar defenses? Will Ukraine's gamble pay off or spark a wider war? Let me find out. September 28, 2025, 3:42 a.m. The foggy dawn. The Black Sea was strangely calm, suddenly broken. On the radar screen of the western naval base of Ukraine, near Odessa, 5 sharp streaks of light suddenly appeared. The officer on duty was stunned. These were not random spots of light. Speed? More than 550 miles per hour. Flight path? Deadly straight. A warning flashed on the control panel. Caliber NK cruise missiles launched from the Russian frigate Admiral Grigorevich, lurking 180 kilometers off the coast. Their flight path left no doubt. They wanted to strike head-on at our last major naval stronghold since the fall of Sevastopol. If this base fell, Ukraine's Black Sea defenses would collapse completely. Inside the control bunker, Commander Oleg Morozov slammed his fist on the intercom. Activate NASAMS. All units to combat positions. Within seconds, the NASAMS 3 air defense system roared to life. 5 a.m. 120C interceptors shot into the sky, tearing through the dark clouds like silver arrows. Immediately, 3 Russian missiles were destroyed in mid-air at an altitude of 6,000 meters. Burning fragments fell into the sea, exploding into columns of white smoke. But 2 of them slipped through the interceptor net. At 3:47 a.m., the first missile struck 2 Ukraine 312 patrol boats moored at the dock. The explosion ripped the 600-ton ship apart, sending warped steel flying across the harbor. Seconds later, the second warhead struck the eastern part of the base, detonating inside the maintenance shed. A fireball engulfed the hangars and supply depots. In less than a minute, a third of the base was paralyzed. Radar rays bent, cranes toppled, fuel lines ruptured. Black columns of smoke billowed into the night sky. 23 sailors were killed instantly, 57 were injured, and millions of pieces of critical infrastructure were reduced to twisted steel. The attack forced an immediate halt to grain exports from the Odessa corridor, raising fears of economic aftershocks across Eastern Europe. The Black Sea had gone from quiet to hell, but this was only the beginning. In Kiev, the response was being planned, and it would send shockwaves all the way to St. Petersburg. 4:10 a.m., Kiev Command Center. The room was silent, except for the hissing of oxygen masks and the crackling of burning steel, broadcast live from Odessa. A single image filled the wall. The western naval base in flames, the docks in ruins, the patrol boat Ukraina 312 in flames, 29 dead, 57 wounded. A third of the base paralyzed. For the Ukrainian Naval Command, it was not just an attack. It was a public challenge. General Mykola Romanenko, head of the Joint Operations Command, stood motionless, his hands clenched, his words were sharp. If they hit us in the heart, we will hit them in the veins. Within minutes, the operation had been named Iron Swarm, a mission designed not for revenge, but to expose the truth. Target: Severnaya Shipyard in St. Petersburg, Russia's largest submarine building center, responsible for assembling the Yazan M nuclear attack submarine. Its destruction would cripple Moscow's long-term naval power. At 4.24, orders were transmitted across encrypted networks. From Vasilkiv Air Base, Ukrainian engineers had equipped 540 combat drones, a fleet that combined precision and deception. 240 Sparrow 7 electronic warfare drones, equipped with signal jammers and decoy landing gear. 300 Stingray ER suicide UAVs, each carrying a 12-kilogram armor-piercing warhead, guided by a terrain-following algorithm. Each drone cost less than $2,000, but together they packed the same punch as a billion-dollar arsenal. Their mission? Blind, confuse, and then incinerate. At 4:58 a.m., the skies over Kiev shook. Engines roared to life, and the sky filled with wings. The swarms took off in waves, stretching more than 12 kilometers into the sky, soaring north in a storm of steel and fire. The pain of loss in Odessa had now turned to rage, clearly defined and directed. Ukraine was no longer on the defensive. They were about to strike where Russia felt the most pain. What do you think? Can drones worth $2,000 really bring down a fortress guarded by billion-dollar systems? 5:23 a.m. The northern sky is tinged with dawn light. The operators are dozing off when suddenly the radar screens at the Severnaya shipyard light up with warning lights. The 91N6E Big Bird long-range radar detects hundreds of rapidly approaching targets. In a panic, the order is given. Activate all defense systems immediately. A few minutes later, Panzer S-1 batteries roar, scanning the horizon. The Russian command center near Kronstadt shouts one word. Mass attack is approaching. A wall of missiles explodes from the launcher. 48 S-400 interceptors tear through the air, forming a deadly umbrella over the Baltic seaport. In just a few seconds, nearly 240 drones are destroyed mid-flight. Glowing embers fall like snow. But this is just a decoy. While Russian radar operators focused on the chaos above, the second wave, the real culprits, crept in. 300 Stingray ER drones hovered just 15 meters above the Neva River, slipping under radar coverage. By the time Russian gunners noticed, it was too late. At 5:39 a.m., the first wave crashed into the submarine assembly hangar. An explosion ripped through steel scaffolding, igniting fuel tanks. Seconds later, more drones hit the steel foundry and welding shop, causing secondary explosions that rocked the entire shipyard. It didn't stop there. A second explosion ripped through shipyard number 3, where 3 Yasen M-class hulls were being built. The pressure wave flattened the scaffolding and tossed steel sheets like paper. Minutes later, the fuel tanks erupted. 70-meter-high flames visible from across the Neva. The shockwave shattered 1,200 windows in neighboring districts. Workers fled in panic, some jumping into the icy river. Inside, engineers trapped by collapsing beams shouted over the radio, "There's a fire in Sector 12. We're losing control." At 5:51 a.m., a series of explosions followed. 13 blasts thundered in succession. Fireballs, some as high as 60 meters, tore through the industrial area. A warehouse housing submarine turbines collapsed in flames. A huge paint warehouse collapsed into molten rubble. An engine test tank ruptured, spilling tens of thousands of gallons of burning fuel into the river. Witnesses described the horrific scene, the series of explosions turning the shipyard into a fiery crater. Many were trapped in the chaos. 196 were injured. 75 people were confirmed dead. Their cries for help drowned out by the roar of the explosions. The flames were so high that low-orbit satellites caught the light, broadcasting the inferno to the world. The Severnaya shipyard, Russia's pride in submarine production, was incinerated. In 12 minutes, drones did what cruise missiles or bombers would take hours to do. Billions of dollars in property were destroyed before Russian command had even stabilized communications. The Black Sea offensive had been bloody. But here in the north, Ukraine had shattered something much more profound, Russia's sense of invulnerability in its own heartland. Don't go anywhere. The real shock wasn't the explosions, but the aftermath. 7 a.m. The morning after the fire, Moscow's defense ministry rushed to declare victory. Official reports claimed all drones were intercepted and that Russia's defenses remained strong. But the truth could not be hidden. Commercial satellites, civilian smartphone images, and leaked video painted a different picture. Half of the Severnaya shipyard lay in ruins. The scale of the devastation was horrifying. At least 3 Yasenem nuclear attack submarines, each worth nearly $1.6 billion, were destroyed on the assembly line. Entire production plants collapsed, their roofs twisted into burning rubble. Specialized lines for manufacturing nuclear reactor modules were completely destroyed, disrupting work for an estimated 18 to 24 months. Analysts estimate the total economic damage at $2.3 billion to $2.5 billion, the costliest drone attack in modern history. But the financial hit is only part of the crisis. With the shipyard crippled, Russia's naval buildup in the Baltic has been abruptly halted. Projections suggest Moscow's submarine fleet will be 30% less combat-ready over the next 5 years, leaving gaps in the country's northern deterrent. The loss of life adds to the grief. Rescue teams sifting through the wreckage have reported 75 confirmed dead, with fears the death toll could rise as more missing workers are found. More than 120,000 square meters of industrial floor space have been destroyed. Thousands of tons of raw steel, reactor hulls, and torpedo launchers have been reduced to molten scrap. The political shock was even more severe. On social media, images of the firestorm spread like wildfire. Hashtags demanding accountability spread across Europe and beyond. NATO officials privately called the operation a textbook example of low-cost, high-impact warfare. In Washington and London, military analysts hailed it as the most effective drone strike of the 21st century. In Kiev, morale soared. The losses in Odessa were avenged not with billion-dollar missiles, but with ingenuity, coordination, and sheer daring. Operation Iron Swarm was a game-changer. Ukraine had demonstrated that it could strike not just on the battlefield, but at the very heart of Russia's defense industry. For Moscow, the Severnaya fire was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological blow, a reminder that even the fortress of St. Petersburg was no longer impregnable. 9 a.m., September 28, 2025, St. Petersburg and beyond, the Severnaya fire raged for 1 day before rescuers finally brought it under control. By then, the damage was undeniable. Russia had lost more than $2.5 billion in naval assets, thousands of tons of industrial equipment, and 3 new-generation submarines. But beyond the fire, something much bigger had changed: the rules of modern warfare. In Kiev, generals reviewed the operation with a simple conclusion. Brains had triumphed over steel. Operation Iron Swarm cost Ukraine less than $1 million in total equipment, 540 drones, each costing an average of $2,000. Yet that modest investment destroyed billions of dollars worth of infrastructure, setting back Russia's naval might by nearly 2 years. The cost ratio is staggering. For every dollar Ukraine spends, Moscow loses more than $2,000. The lesson is clear. Modern warfare is no longer determined solely by billion-dollar missiles or fleets of heavy bombers. Instead, it is being rewritten by a series of cheap, fragile machines, controlled not by brute force, but by intelligence, coordination, and adaptability. For Russia, the shock was profound. The Kremlin had invested decades in building a fortress-like defense system around St. Petersburg. Dozens of S-400 and Panzer S-1 batteries and a network of radars were supposed to form an impenetrable shield. Yet overnight that shield was breached, outmaneuvered by swarms of drones that cost less than a guided artillery shell. International observers took note. In Washington, analysts warned that the attacks signaled the dawn of a new era, one in which a $2,000 drone could rival a $200 million warship. In London, military pundits compared the Iron Swarm to the tank breakthroughs of World War II or the first use of jet aircraft, a moment when war itself changed. For Ukrainians, the message was different but equally powerful. The airstrike was not just revenge for Odessa. It was proof that survival, even in the face of adversity, was possible. it was also proof that creativity could level the battlefield. As dawn broke over St. Petersburg, the sky was still red with smoke. More than just a fire, it was a warning written in fire. In the 21st century, the winning side is not the one with the heaviest weapons but the one that thinks the fastest. The airstrikes of September 28, 2025, will be remembered not just as single battles but as a turning point in modern warfare. At Odessa, Russian-caliber missiles tore through Ukraine's last naval stronghold, killing 29 sailors, wounding 57, and crippling a base worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For a moment, Ukraine's naval future seemed to be in flames. But just hours later, Kyiv responded with a campaign that changed the balance of power. With 540 drones, a force that cost less than $1 million, Ukraine leveled the Severnaya shipyard, wiped out $2.5 billion in assets, and destroyed 3 Yazan nuclear submarines. The cost ratio, 1 to 2,000, was not just shocking, it was historic. The Black Sea has seen devastation, but St. Petersburg has also suffered humiliation. A fortress city protected by layers of S-400 and Panzer missiles was penetrated not by stealth bombers or hypersonic weapons, but by swarms of small, fragile drones. The world watched in horror as satellite images revealed 120,000 square meters of industrial floor space in ruins and columns of smoke visible from orbit. This was not just revenge, it was a lesson etched in steel and fire. 21st century warfare will not be won by those with the biggest budgets, but by those who think faster, adapt faster, and strike smarter. For Ukraine, Operation Iron Swarm was proof that intelligence and ingenuity can triumph over brute force. For Russia, it was a bitter reminder that no shield is impenetrable. And for the world, it was a warning. The era of billion-dollar war machines was fading, and the era of low-cost, high-efficiency warfare had arrived. The Black Sea burned, St. Petersburg burned, and history turned a new page. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe the world must see both the horror and the hope, then join us. Subscribe to this channel, share these truths, and keep this conversation alive. Together, we can make sure silence is never the final word, and that justice always carries the last say.